A hostile nation was secretly working to construct a nuclear weapon. Behind the operation stood a mastermind whose obsession was the annihilation of Israel. General Mohammed Slan loathed Israelis, despised the very existence of the Jewish state, and was determined to see it destroyed. Neutralizing this threat would require the coordination of 3 elite Black Ops units. Special forces teams, operating deep behind enemy lines, were assigned to verify the danger. That mission was staggeringly perilous. One slip, one mistake, and it could have erupted into war. Next came an elite flying squadron tasked with striking the target. They destroyed the objective, withdrew without error, and suffered no casualties. Finally, the operation demanded an assassination unit to eliminate the mastermind behind the entire plot. 3 of its men surfaced from the sea by scuba, crept into his private beach house, shot him dead, and disappeared without leaving a trace. This was the classified story of Israel's secret strike against Syria. In 2004, deep within North Korea, a train was moving through a desolate northern town when disaster struck. In April of that year, a massive train explosion ripped through the region. The blast was so powerful it registered on seismographs as a magnitude 3.6 earthquake. Hundreds of lives were lost, a town of 10,000 people was devastated, and more than 2,000 individuals were left wounded. The official statement from the North Korean regime claimed the train had been transporting liquefied petroleum gas. New to buried intel. This is where we bring the buried stories of history back to light. Hit subscribe and be part of the journey into the secrets they never wanted you to know. But before journalists or investigators could look deeper, Pyongyang imposed a total blackout, forbidding any further reporting. 1 week later, authorities issued a sweeping ban on all mobile phone use across the nation, a ban that remained in place for 5 years. This led the world to wonder what exactly was happening inside the secretive nuclear state. 5,000 miles away, another nation was watching events with growing concern. Israel's intelligence chief, Meir Dagan, the head of Mossad, took a particular interest. Dagan was a legendary figure within Israel's security establishment, widely known for his ruthlessness and his willingness to employ brutal methods in defense of the state's survival. North Korea operating under a veil of secrecy was nothing new. But what drew Dagan's attention now was intelligence indicating that a Syrian aircraft had recently landed in Pyongyang. Such direct contact between North Korea and an Arab regime was both rare and deeply alarming to Israel. That was the moment Mossad began to examine the situation much more closely. The Syrian plane was said to be providing humanitarian aid, yet evidence suggested otherwise. Instead, it appeared to be carrying bodies from the explosion. Even more suspicious, the corpses were sealed in lead-lined coffins, handled only by men in chemical protection suits. The strangeness did not end there. Soon it was revealed that the bodies inside those coffins were not North Korean citizens at all. They were Syrian scientists, 12 of them, working with the Syrian Scientific Research Center, the covert institution behind Damascus's military development and weapons acquisition programs. For Dagan, the implications were chilling. Could it be that North Korea was actively assisting Syria in building a nuclear bomb? That possibility became a matter of urgent priority. Mossad made it their mission to uncover the truth, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to one of the most audacious black operations in modern history. 2 years later, in London, a woman walked into the bar of an upscale hotel. Her arrival caught the attention of a man sitting alone, drinking quietly. But this was no chance encounter. The man was a senior Syrian nuclear official traveling on his own. He had checked into a luxury hotel, planning to attend a meeting the following morning. But for the evening he was free. Settling at the bar, he was delighted to meet a charming woman. She impressed him, and he was thrilled to have her attention. What he did not realize was that Mossad had been alerted to his presence the moment he registered under a false identity. Surveillance teams were already in place, tracking his every move. Unaware of this, the Syrian official continued drinking, growing more confident as the woman's flirtations seemed to deepen. He ordered round after round, convinced that he had found the perfect way to spend the night. What he could not know was that the woman across from him was no ordinary stranger. She was an operative. Her task was to distract him, keeping him occupied, while her teammates quietly infiltrated his hotel room upstairs. The Mossad team breaking into his room belonged to Unit Neviot, a highly trained group of specialists in covert entry and surveillance. Experts at bypassing locks and security systems, they could breach a hotel suite in seconds. Within moments, they had overridden the electronic protections on the door. Inside, they found exactly what they were hoping for. The Syrian had left his laptop unattended. Seizing the opportunity, they immediately copied the entire contents of its hard drive. Every file was secured, then transmitted directly back to Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv. The agents did not stop there. They also installed spyware, ensuring that Israel could continue to monitor the device in real time, long after the operation ended. Mission complete, the operatives slipped away without being noticed. The female agent, having done her job, abandoned the smitten Syrian, leaving him completely unaware that he had been used. Within 15 minutes, Dagan and his analysts in Tel Aviv were scanning the stolen files. What they found was astonishing. Among the folders were strange JPEGs, hundreds of photographs documenting the construction of a massive industrial installation. The facility was enormous, its main structure measuring 130 feet by 130 feet and rising 70 feet high. Early images showed the building raised on stilts, with pipelines running to a pumping station. Later photographs revealed modifications, until the entire complex was hidden beneath a huge roof. At first, even Dagan struggled to determine the site's purpose, but as he studied the images further, realization struck. The heavy industrial equipment inside the structure looked hauntingly familiar. The design, the layout, the scale. It was nearly identical to something he had seen in North Korean intelligence archives. It matched the Yongbyon nuclear reactor, the core of North Korea's weapons program. The resemblance was exact, the dimensions and equipment perfectly aligned. For Dagan, there was no longer any doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. North Korea was constructing a nuclear reactor inside Syria. Additional data from the laptop confirmed the conclusion. Detailed blueprints of the facility, step-by-step construction photographs, even snapshots of Syrian and North Korean nuclear experts working together. For Israel, this was the embodiment of their darkest nightmare. If there was ever a moment to eliminate the general, this was it. The place was set, the opportunity was there, but the operation would require the expertise of another one of Israel's covert black operations units to carry it out. This particular group is known as the Kaidan. The word Kaidan literally translates as bayonet. Within Mossad, they are infamous for their role in high-level assassinations, but their talents go beyond that. They are masters at infiltrating enemy nations, slipping in and out unnoticed, and leaving almost no trace behind. Among both allies and enemies, they are respected, even feared, as some of the most capable and highly trained operatives in the world. Inside Israel's covert structure, the Kaidan is the most secretive of all elite units. Almost nothing about their missions has ever been revealed by any Israeli government. They are legendary for one particular specialty: hunting down and assassinating Israel's enemies no matter where they might be hiding across the globe. When Canadian weapons engineer Gerald Bull was discovered to be working with Saddam Hussein, he met a sudden and violent end, an act widely believed to have been orchestrated by the Kaidan. Over the years, they have also eliminated dozens of Iranian nuclear scientists, North Korean engineers, and Syrian specialists. There is no Israeli unit more suited or more prepared to execute a high-level assassination abroad than the Kaidan. It is this very team that many believe was tasked with planning the elimination of General Mohammed Sulan. As the Kaidan began to study Suleiman's villa, they quickly noticed a critical vulnerability. While the estate was heavily protected from the road and even from the sea, the rear of the villa was left completely exposed. The Israelis learned that when Sulan stayed at this residence, he frequently hosted guests on the large balcony overlooking the water. At first, they considered a bold plan, approaching by boat and attempting to strike from offshore. The idea was to position a sniper close enough to the coast to take the general out with a long-range shot, but such a mission carried enormous risk. They would only get one opportunity, and a precision headshot from a moving boat against a target firmly on land was simply too dangerous. The greater the distance, the lower the chance of success. Shooting from an unstable platform across the waves made the task nearly impossible. The plan was abandoned. That left only one option. Someone would have to go ashore. A yacht sailed quietly up the Mediterranean coast towards Tartus. On paper, the vessel was registered to a wealthy businessman, but on this voyage its true passengers were two Qaidan snipers. Intelligence reports later claimed that one of Israel's assassination teams had arrived just off the Syrian coast, aboard that very yacht. Roughly a kilometer offshore, the vessel lowered its sails. From there, the assassins slipped into the water and swam silently toward land. Disguised as scuba divers, they made their way to the general's private beach house. At that very moment, General Sulan was arriving at his seaside villa for the weekend. As the sun began to sink into the horizon, the snipers emerged from the sea, their figures hidden by the fading light. From their concealed position, they observed the guests gathered on the terrace. Cloaked in shadows, they knew that from above their presence was virtually invisible. Still, they could not yet see their target. Eventually, the general appeared. He was dining at his country home by the sea, seated at a long table with friends and family. As he entertained his guests, the two snipers carefully lined him up in their crosshairs. They prepared themselves to take the shot, but then, in a moment of frustration, the target was suddenly obscured. They shifted silently to a new position. Relocating, the two marksmen adjusted their rifles and set their aim once again. In their earpieces, a calm electronic voice began a countdown, ensuring that both rifles would fire at the exact same instant. And then, in one synchronized moment, they pulled the triggers. It was not an easy shot, but both bullets found their mark. The general collapsed instantly. One round struck his head, the other pierced his neck. The mission was complete. The Qaidan operatives melted back into the shadows, their escape as silent as their arrival. As with the bombing of the Syrian nuclear reactor, Israel has never officially admitted responsibility for the assassination of General Sulan. The Israeli government avoids speaking publicly about conducting killings on foreign soil because such actions openly violate international law. Yet, on rare occasions, they issue subtle acknowledgments. In this case, Israeli officials referred to the general's death as a very happy accident, a chillingly casual phrase that only reinforced what most already believed. The destruction of Syria's nuclear ambitions was an extraordinary achievement. It required the coordination of three of Israel's most elite forces: Sayeret Matkal, who first identified and confirmed the threat, the Shaldog unit, who carried out the strike on the reactor itself, and finally the Qaidan, who ensured that the program could never be revived by eliminating its mastermind. Together, these operations prevented a volatile and unpredictable regime from acquiring the deadliest weapon of all, nuclear arms. The importance of that outcome has only become clearer since 2011, when Syria descended into a brutal and catastrophic civil war. A hostile nuclear threat was emerging dangerously close to Israel's borders. This was not an energy project for peaceful use. It was a nuclear reactor that had only one possible purpose. Whoever was building it was not interested in light bulbs or electricity. There was only one reason for its existence: to assemble and manufacture a nuclear bomb. Danan was now certain beyond doubt that Syria was pursuing a nuclear weapons program. The problem was, he still did not know the exact location of the facility. Determined to uncover the truth, he ordered Israeli satellites to begin scanning and monitoring potential sites inside Syria. In time, intelligence narrowed its focus to a barren and isolated area called Al-Kibar. It was here that Israeli operatives intercepted an unusual surge of communication activity. An unexpected spike in telephone traffic was traced from this desolate location directly to Pyongyang in North Korea. Al-Kibar was far from the Syrian capital Damascus, tucked away in the remote northeastern desert. Yet it was close enough to the Euphrates River and not too distant from the Iraqi border to raise suspicions. Israeli satellite imagery soon revealed a large structure standing there. When analysts compared the photographs with images stolen from the Syrian nuclear laptop, the similarity was undeniable. Al-Kibar perfectly matched the hidden reactor blueprints. It had to be the heart of Syria's secret nuclear program. With this intelligence in hand, Danan went straight to the Prime Minister of Israel. Ehud Olmert was briefed with urgency. Danan explained that Syria had reached an advanced stage in its development of nuclear weapons. Olmert immediately understood the gravity of the situation. His reaction was direct and absolute. A Syrian nuclear weapons program, he said, was intolerable for Israel. Such a threat could never be permitted to exist. For Israel, this was an existential danger. If Syria completed its reactor, the very survival of the state would be at risk. The conclusion was unavoidable. The reactor had to be eliminated. But before giving the order, Olmert needed answers to key questions. His foremost concern was how far along the construction had progressed. If the reactor was already active, bombing it might trigger catastrophic consequences. The destruction of an operational reactor could unleash deadly radioactive contamination across the region. At this point, Danan could not say for certain. The stolen images were already 15 months old. Logic suggested the facility had advanced well beyond those outdated pictures, but no one knew by how much. Israel urgently needed fresh intelligence on the site's true condition. That meant only one thing: an incredibly dangerous step. Someone would have to go inside Syria and see it with their own eyes. This would require a mission so perilous that it risked the lives of Israel's most capable operatives. Olmert knew there was only one unit in the entire Israeli military capable of such an undertaking. He turned to Israel's elite black operations force. In Hebrew, they were called Sayeret Matkal, known simply as the Unit. Sayeret Matkal was legendary in Israel, its reputation bordering on myth. This was the most elite formation in the Israeli Defense Forces, tasked with operations beyond the reach of conventional troops. Their missions resembled those of the British SAS, America's Navy SEALs or Delta Force. Highly trained, highly secretive, and capable of going where no one else could, Sayeret Matkal specialized in silent infiltration far behind enemy lines. Over decades, they had slipped undetected into Jordan, into Lebanon, and into other hostile territories, always returning with intelligence without ever being officially acknowledged. Now, under the cover of a humid midsummer night, a small team of selected commandos prepared for one of their most dangerous operations. Their task: penetrate deep inside Syria and confirm whether the Al-Kibar reactor was real. Details of how they got there remain shrouded in secrecy. But what is understood is that the Israelis were masters at moving unseen, often using low-flying helicopters that made barely a sound. On this mission, the team boarded two massive CH-53 Sea Stallion helicopters, flying at treetop level under the cover of night to cross the border into Syrian airspace. Pilots navigated the terrain through night vision goggles, avoiding radar detection. As an additional safeguard, some of the commandos disguised themselves as Syrian soldiers. The helicopters dropped them off a safe distance away from the target. From there, they would approach on foot. The team moved stealthily through the desert until they reached within a mile of the mysterious building. They knew that once the helicopters departed, there would be no rescue if they were discovered. The Syrians could never suspect their presence. Capture would mean not only death but also the possibility of sparking a war. Despite the overwhelming danger, the mission pressed forward. The commandos crept to within meters of the Al-Kibar structure and began their work. Intelligence collection was conducted directly on the ground, at the very edge of the suspected nuclear site. Disguised in Syrian uniforms, they photographed the facility in detail. But photographs alone were not enough. They also gathered soil and water samples from around the site. This was the critical part of the mission. Only laboratory testing could determine whether the reactor had become operational. Even the faintest trace of radioactive particles in water would prove activity inside the reactor core. Once the samples were secured, the commandos carefully erased any trace of their presence. But just as they prepared to leave, danger closed in. They were almost discovered. In the very last moments, they managed to slip away undetected. Against all odds, the mission was complete. The unit returned to Israel carrying the precious samples. In Tel Aviv, government laboratories subjected the soil and water to exhaustive analysis. The results were delivered to Olmert and Danan. The findings confirmed radioactive contamination, but only in tiny amounts. Crucially, the levels showed the reactor was not yet fully operational. This meant the project was dangerously close, but it had not gone live. The timing was critical. With this knowledge, Olmert now had the window he needed. The reactor could still be destroyed before it reached the point of no return. He convened Israel's top military and intelligence chiefs. The decision was clear. Al-Kibar had to be taken out. They were all in agreement on one central point. Once this reactor became operational, the consequences were unacceptable and unavoidable. The conclusion was already drawn. It could not be tolerated. The decision was final. The reactor would not be allowed to remain, and it had to be eliminated. The only real debate was about the method of destruction. The first possible option was to send in the Sayeret Matkal, Israel's most elite commando unit. This would mean infiltrating the area with a small, highly trained ground force and attempting to plant enough explosives to demolish the structure. On paper, it was feasible. Israeli commandos had successfully carried out secret missions before, and the belief was that they could, in theory, reach the target site. But as the planners examined this more closely, the flaws became obvious. A covert ground assault would be a massive and extremely hazardous undertaking. Special forces would need to penetrate deep into hostile territory, carry in a substantial quantity of explosives, and detonate them at precisely the right points. Even then, there was no certainty the plan would succeed. The building was no ordinary facility. It was a massive nuclear reactor constructed from reinforced concrete and heavy steel. Israeli military officials had doubts that any commando team, no matter how skilled, could bring in enough explosive power to ensure its complete destruction. Sending a handful of men with backpacks full of charges simply was not going to be enough. That left one other path: striking from the air. The logic was simple. Air power could deliver overwhelming firepower at high speed, dropping massive amounts of ordnance before the enemy even grasped what was happening. Unlike a ground mission, it allowed for a clean and rapid disengagement. Between the two alternatives, an airstrike offered the best balance, more efficient, less risky, and far more destructive. The Prime Minister issued the order: prepare for an aerial assault on the Syrian reactor. The mission would later be named Operation Orchard. To pull it off, another branch of Israel's elite forces would be called into action: Squadron 69, known as the Hashim, the Hammer Squadron. There was no unit better suited to obliterate an enemy's nuclear ambitions. They had already proven themselves once before. A generation earlier, 25 years back, pilots of the Hashim had been tasked with another mission of global consequence. 8 of them flew into Iraqi airspace to bomb a nuclear reactor being built under Saddam Hussein. One of those pilots recalled the mission: a fighter pilot, deputy squadron commander, fully prepared to take on the responsibility of annihilating Iraq's nuclear capability. They evaded Iraqi defenses and executed a precise strike that obliterated the facility. The entire operation, from takeoff to impact, lasted exactly 1 hour, 43 minutes, and 30 seconds. But now, a quarter-century later, Syria posed an even greater challenge. The Israeli Air Force had a reputation for making the impossible look effortless, but the reality was far different. Flying into Syria was nothing like flying into Iraq. For decades, Syria had invested heavily in one of the world's strongest anti-aircraft defense systems. They had installed the advanced Russian-built Tor M1 air defense system and had numerous surface-to-air missile batteries positioned and ready to repel any attack. Nothing about this mission would be simple. Israel had to rely on advanced countermeasures. The Hashim were equipped with US-made F-15 and F-16 fighter bombers. These aircraft were specifically built to cope with such threats. The F-16, for example, had the ability to shake off radar lock from missile systems. Pilots could deploy ECM flares to divert guided missiles, use electronic warfare to jam enemy radars, and deploy sophisticated countermeasures to fool air defense networks. With this technology, they could slip into Syrian airspace undetected. Meanwhile, the Hashim pilots began training relentlessly. The mission would demand absolute precision. Their bombs had to strike exact points on the building to penetrate its thick structure and explode from within. They rehearsed steep dive-bombing runs on tiny, carefully measured practice targets, refining their skills until flawless accuracy became instinct. Overseeing these drills was General Eliezer Shkedi, commander of the Israeli Air Force. He was not just watching technique, he was selecting which of the squadron's pilots were the very best. Israel could only send a limited number of aircraft into Syria. Sending too many planes would increase the risk of detection. After countless simulations and calculations, they determined the optimal strike package: just enough aircraft to guarantee destruction of the reactor, but not so many that the operation would be exposed. A date for Operation Orchard had not yet been fixed, but then a development forced Israel's hand. Mossad intelligence revealed troubling activity at Syria's coast. North Korean ships were docking at the port of Tartus, unloading materials that would allow the Al-Kabar reactor to become fully operational. Time had run out. Waiting any longer would mean losing the window to strike. The order was given. The mission had to proceed immediately. At exactly 23:59, 10 Hashim pilots were commanded to take off. Yet even now, as they climbed into their cockpits, they did not know the true target of their mission. Around midnight in early September, two groups of planes lifted into the night sky, F-16s and F-15s, departing in intervals of 20 seconds. Armed with 500-pound AGM-65 bombs, they surged across the sea at nearly 600 miles per hour, flying a carefully plotted route designed to bypass Syrian defenses. Israeli planners had mapped the path in detail, west over the Mediterranean, northward, and then east, slipping quietly over Turkish airspace. Deep underground, inside the Israeli Air Force's command bunker known as the Pit, the Prime Minister and senior military leaders watched the mission unfold in real time. They tracked the fighter's course, monitoring every detail. Once it was confirmed that all planes were operating without technical problems, 3 of the F-15s were ordered to return home. The remaining 7 aircraft continued toward their target, flying at extremely low altitude. They followed the coast up the Mediterranean, then turned eastward along the Syrian-Turkish border. Only now, mid-flight, were the pilots informed of the truth. This was not an exercise. It was a live combat mission, and they were flying directly into heavily defended Syrian airspace. For these elite pilots, suppressing fear was part of the job. As one explained, fighter pilots develop mental techniques to push fear down, to keep it under control. But no one is ever free of it. Anyone claiming they feel no fear in such moments is lying. It is always present, always there in the back of the mind, the knowledge that at any second you could be killed. And with that sobering reality, the Israeli strike force closed in on Syrian skies. The Israeli jets are now entering enemy skies, fully aware that this is the moment they will confront the Syrian air defense network. The military side of the operation revolves around a single crucial task: somehow bypassing the Syrian radar so that their presence is never detected. Using electronic codes that were reportedly obtained from Russia, the Israelis managed to perform a deception that is both simple and devastating. The Syrian radars suddenly display what seems like hundreds of hostile aircraft flooding their airspace. Then, in the very next instant, all those phantom planes vanish from the screens, leaving nothing at all. To the Syrian operators, it looks like nothing more than a temporary technical glitch. The Israelis have manipulated the system so that everything appears perfectly normal, but in reality, their jets are invisible. The Syrians have no clue that their skies are already under attack. With that deception in place, the Israeli pilots press forward into enemy territory. The exact coordinates of the Al-Kabar complex are transmitted directly to the computers inside their cockpits. The formation veers southward, setting up for the bombing run. This is the riskiest part of the mission. At this point, the breathing of every pilot grows heavier, their pulse racing higher. It is no longer about advanced technology or electronic trickery. Now the human element is everything. When the moment comes, it is the pilot alone who must find the target, line it up, and aim precisely. No one else can help with that final, crucial step. Yet this is also when they are most vulnerable. For roughly 1 minute, they are completely exposed, concentrating solely on sighting and releasing their bombs. In those seconds, they are not defending themselves, not maneuvering away, but locked on the target. That single minute becomes the hardest, most dangerous stretch of the entire flight. As the bombing run begins, the Israeli cockpits suddenly detect anti-aircraft missiles being fired in their direction. Back in Tel Aviv, inside the command bunker, no one knows what is happening in the skies over Syria. Has the target been struck? Have the pilots survived? Or have they been shot down? The tension is unbearable. Then, a single word crackles across the radio. Arizona. Repeated again. Arizona. It is the code word confirming the bombs have hit their mark. The reactor is destroyed. No Israeli planes have been lost. The target has been obliterated. At the sight, Nothing remains but twisted wreckage and a smoking crater. The most perilous phase of the mission is finished. Once the bombs are gone, the aircraft are lighter, more agile. The pilots can maneuver with far greater ease. Dropping to a lower altitude, they finally allow themselves to exhale, beginning to relax for the first time. They push hard for the border, streaking out of Syrian airspace at top speed. The mission is over. It is a complete success. Objective destroyed. Not a single casualty. Almost immediately, a call is placed to the White House. President George W. Bush is informed with a carefully chosen phrase, "Something that never existed does not exist anymore." The Syrian reactor is gone. But now comes the waiting game, the tense uncertainty of whether Syria will retaliate. Olmert, the Israeli Prime Minister, feels confident Assad will not dare to respond. Still, there is no way to be entirely sure. Immediately after the strike, he sends a private message to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, assuring him that Israel will not publicly take credit for the raid. The calculation is straightforward. If Israel remains silent, does not claim responsibility, and avoids boasting, then Assad might prefer to simply ignore what has happened. For Assad, publicly acknowledging the strike would mean admitting to the world that Syria had been developing an illegal nuclear program, and that it had been demolished in a single night. Such humiliation is something he would rather avoid. Olmert's gamble is that Assad will swallow his pride and let the matter fade into silence. And indeed, the gamble works. Syrian state media announces that their air defenses repelled Israeli planes, a complete fabrication, but one both sides are willing to accept. Publicly, the raid never happened. Quietly, Olmert has succeeded in safeguarding Israel's future. Yet a troubling question remains for Mir Dagan, the head of Mossad, and for his deputy Tamir Pardo. How had Syria managed to construct such a massive secret project without Israeli intelligence knowing for 7 years? A nuclear reactor is enormous. It is not something that can be easily hidden. Mossad begins digging into the mystery, determined to learn how Syria concealed the Al-Kabar facility. What they uncover is a unique, old-fashioned communication system. To protect secrecy, Syrian officials had abandoned all electronic correspondence. They reverted to the methods of another era, printing messages on paper, sealing them with wax, marking them top secret, and dispatching them by hand. Trusted couriers carried the envelopes from office to office, building to building. At the very center of this covert network stood a man known for his deep hatred of Israel and his immense influence in Damascus, General Mohammed Suleiman. He was one of the most powerful figures in Syria, a close confidant of President Bashar al-Assad. His office sat just across the corridor from the president's own, inside the presidential palace. Because of this proximity, he earned the nickname Assad's Shadow. Suleiman was the mastermind who compartmentalized the project so effectively that almost no one in the Syrian government knew the full picture. For years he had overseen the nuclear program in total secrecy, but Mossad's intelligence soon revealed something even more alarming. Suleiman had not been deterred by the destruction of Al-Kibar. Instead, Syria appeared to be resuming its efforts, starting again from scratch. Experts warned that with enough funding, determination, and technical knowledge, a country could rebuild a nuclear program within 5 years. For Israel, this was unacceptable. As long as Suleiman remained alive and in charge, the threat persisted. His extraordinary organizational skills made him far more dangerous than a static building in the desert. Thus, Israeli leaders reached a grim conclusion. Suleiman had to be eliminated. But assassinating him would prove far more difficult than striking a reactor. He was extremely cautious, his movements tightly concealed, his life protected by heavy security. In Damascus, reaching him was impossible. Yet in the summer of 2008, Mossad learned of a rare opportunity. General Suleiman planned to spend a weekend at his seaside villa in the coastal city of Tartus. Security there was far lighter than in the capital,